Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Devin Sears, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Chris Miles, and we are here talking about WordPress plugins, specifically 9 WordPress plugins that every beginner should know about. And if you have built a WordPress website before, then you know there are a ton of plugins out there for you to choose from. And oftentimes it can be overwhelming for someone that's doing this for the first time. So today, we wanted to take a few minutes to go through step by step what defines a plugin, how you can install them, and give 9 plugins that every beginner should know about. And maybe you're not going to use all 9, but we at least think that these are 9 that are worth knowing about if you're not using them. But before we get into the content, just a few housekeeping items I want to go through. As I mentioned previously, we're joined by Chris Miles. He is one of our senior product managers here at Bluehost. He is a friend of the webinar show and has been here multiple times, and we're thrilled to have him back sharing his expertise and his experience with us. So as usual, I am your co-host, Devin Sears. I'm the Senior Field Marketing Manager, and we're excited to have everyone joining us today. And we want to make sure that this is beneficial for you. So if you have any questions, if there's anything that's on your mind as it relates to plugins, please don't hesitate to ask. That brings us to our housekeeping slide. First things first, if you can hear us, go ahead and find the chat and tell us 2 things. 1, tell us where you're tuning in from. And 2, put the number of webinars that you have attended for Bluehost. So if this is your first webinar that you've ever attended, go ahead and put a 1 next to whatever location you're tuning in from. And this just helps us know a little bit about our audience, and we're always interested in making sure that this is educational and engaging. So please go ahead and drop that in the chat. The next thing, if you found the chat, that's great. There's a small tab above where it says chat, or next to where it says chat, that says Q&A. If you have questions, try to ask them in there, and we will do our best to respond to them. If you ask a question in chat, that's fine. I might relocate it to the Q&A tab just so that we can have a back and forth response, because in chat, if a lot of people are chatting, sometimes it can get a little bit lost on which question I'm responding to. To that end, I will be off camera and off mic trying my best to respond to the questions that you're asking as the webinar goes on. So just ask whatever questions you have, don't hesitate. And if I don't know the answer to the question, or if I think that the audience will benefit from hearing the answer to the question, we're going to hold a handful of questions for a Q&A at the end of today's webinar. So the other thing I would like to answer is this will be recorded, and we will be sharing a recording with everyone that registered for this webinar. So if you need to drop out early, don't worry. If we go over something quickly and you want to go back and revisit it in more depth, don't worry. We will send out a copy of this recording, and you can review it as many times as you'd like. If you're tuning in from a mobile device, you may need to click on the stream somewhere on the screen to unmute it. And that's been happening lately. So just as a heads up, keep an eye out for that. Also, if you need any further assistance with your website, at the top of the chat, we call it a sticky note. There's a sticky note there that's available, and you can always go ahead and click on that, and that will take you to something with some of our WordPress experts. So we're trying to make sure that you have the resources you need to be able to build your online presence. And that is the mission of Bluehost, to help you build your online presence. So housekeeping out of the way, the quote of the webinar today is 60,000 plus plugins out there. Spoiler, you don't need 59,950 of them. And obviously this is in jest a little bit, but the point is, because WordPress is an open source software, anyone can write a plugin, any developer can upload a plugin. So there are literally thousands and thousands and thousands of plugins that you can potentially choose from, which is why we thought it'd be helpful to kind of walk through some of our recommendations and maybe at a higher level, how do you evaluate a plugin to determine whether or not it is going to be a good plugin for your website. So specifically, our table of contents for today, why plugins matter is how we're going to start. Must-have plugins for every site. And then we're going to go into a couple of use cases. If you have an e-commerce site or a blogging site, specific use cases, plugins that could be relevant to that situation. And then we're going to also touch on a couple mistakes, best practices, and a toolkit that you can use. And then we're going to finish off with that Q&A as I mentioned. So we are thrilled to have you here with us today. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. And with that, Chris, please take it away.
Great. All right. So chapter 1, why plugins matter. So WordPress comes with a lot of really good functionality, right? Out of the box, you can make a beautiful website, highly functional. Blogging stuff works great. You can make all kinds of different types of sites, but the functionality is really limited to just what WordPress does out of the box. And so if you want to add more functionality, like let's say you want a store, or let's say you want to change how something works, that's where plugins come into play, because you can add or change the way things work by adding a plugin. So yeah, let's go through it. I think it'd be easier if I just show what I mean. So I'm going to share my screen, and here's a test website that I have, where I am gonna, there we go. There's a test website that I have, and I'm gonna log into WP Admin. It looks like I'm already logged in. And I'm gonna navigate over here to plugins. And here is where we've got a list of all of the plugins that are already installed. And if I want to add a new one, I just go to add plugin here, and I can search through the different tabs that are available, or I can search here. So if I want to add, I think I already have WooCommerce, and we'll talk a little bit about that one. But if I want to add a plugin, one of my, I can just search for one. Like if I want something for SEO, I can just search for SEO, and I've got all kinds of different options here. Yoast is what I usually use. And Yoast and Bluehost are the same company. So we work really well together, but it's really just as simple as, clicking add plugin. You can search for what you want. You can try it out. But yeah, the whole idea with plugins is it adds additional functionality. So when I install a new plugin, I've got extra stuff that WordPress can do now. And I didn't have to write any code to do that. I just searched for something and turned it on, and there it is. It's really just as simple as that. Where you can find plugins are just right there in your dashboard. Those come from WordPress.org, which is a free and open repository of WordPress plugins, and you can just add them. That being said, we're going to talk about some of the good and some of the negative of adding too many plugins, or what you should try to avoid, and things like that too. So let's continue on. How many plugins is too many is a question I get a lot. Really, there's no direct answer to this, because it's not so much about the number of plugins. It's really more about the quality of them. If you've got plugins that do exactly what they're supposed to do and nothing else, and they're very lightweight and they're very focused and specific, you can have 100 plugins and be just fine. But all it takes are one or two bad plugins to really slow down your site or create problems. And so the answer to this, how many plugins is too many? It's not really about how many. It's about the quality of them. So quality over quantity. Also, another thing you should watch out for is it can easily become problematic if you've got more than one plugin kind of doing the same thing. It's not always a problem, but it often can be. Where if you've got two different plugins trying to do the same thing, sometimes that can result in a confusing experience, either working on the site or for your site visitors, or sometimes it can even create problems. So watch out for that like you don't accidentally have two plugins doing virtually identical things, that you've got kind of one solution for each problem. Um, Another thing to watch out for that I tend to ask people as they're searching for a plugin for X, Y, or Z, sometimes the best plugin is the one that you don't have to install at all. And what I mean by that is um, sometimes what you're looking for might not even be a plugin. Um, the question is, does it really need to live inside of your website? Sometimes it doesn't. I'll give a quick example. There are plugins. Let me go back to sharing my screen. Um, I'm gonna pick on. I'm gonna pick on this one, the editorial calendar. Editorial calendar. There we go. Now this is actually a very good plugin. I've got nothing against it, but I'm just going to use it because it's an easy example of there are certainly times when it would make sense to use something like this, where you've got a calendar with inside WP admin, um, where you can schedule posts and collaborate with other people on when things are going to go live. This is especially useful for big websites with a lot of different authors and things like that. Or even if you only have one author, kind of planning things out ahead of time can be really useful. That being said, um, a question that you might want to ask yourself is, do you really need a plugin for this? Does it have to live inside WP admin for this to work? Or would you be better off using, say, like a shared Google Calendar so that you don't need a plugin at all? Not that there's anything wrong with this plugin in particular. It's just I'm using it as an example of illustrating. You should always ask the question, do I need a plugin at all for this? Or is this something I can do completely outside of WordPress? Another quick example of that is there are plugins that can help you find images. And if I do like free images, something like this, there are things that will help you. These are all image optimization plugins. But if I do something like, Unsplash would be a good example. Stock pack, there we go. I haven't used this one in particular, but it looks like this one gives you stock photos inside WP admin so that you can easily insert and download them. Pretty cool. And sometimes it's worth it to put that in WP admin because it might save you a little bit of time. But this is one where I would challenge this and say, do you really need that? Do you really need it to be inside WP admin? Or can you just search on Unsplash, search Adobe Stock separately, and then maybe you don't need a plugin at all. You can just find the images you want to use. And, I'm using these as examples, right? There are reasons why in some cases it might be a really good idea to use this. And a lot of times it's just a question of convenience, right? And sometimes that's enough of a reason, is it's just really convenient. But it's just something to think about is, do you really need it to be a plugin? Or is this just some other tool you can use? So it's just something to think about. So going back to our slides here, that's what I mean by, should I even use a plugin for this? It's just a question you should ask yourself. Continuing on. Must have plugins for every site. There's really no hard set of, every single site definitely needs this, but there's some categories of things that you should certainly take care of. And just like we talked about before, doesn't always require a plugin. Sometimes it does. But you should ask the question, what are you doing about security, right? If you've got a managed WordPress hosting provider that's doing a good job in that space, maybe the security that they're offering doesn't use a plugin. Maybe It just uses a web app firewall, some login protection, a lot of different facets of things. Or maybe you do want to use a security plugin. Maybe you've got a specific one that you really like. Um, WordFence is really good. Security is really good. Limit login attempts is really good. Um, so it's a question of, are you satisfied with the security that you have? Do you have enough? If you're not sure, talk to your hosting provider. They'll help you with that. And if you're not really satisfied with what your hosting provider is offering you there, um, maybe it's time to look elsewhere, right? Um, Speed, same thing. Um, a lot of really good managed hosting providers will give you a caching plugin that works with their environment really well. Um, Bluehost has the Bluehost plugin. Other hosts have similar solutions like that. So it's a question of like, that's a good one to talk to your host about and just say like, hey, am I taken care of there? Um, Backups. There's ways to do backups that don't require plugins at all, that are done kind of on the hosting provider side. Um, this is one where I really often do like to use a plugin just because um, the convenience of having things integrated at kind of the application sort of layer is often really useful. It's nice if your backup solution can have knowledge of things within WordPress. Like maybe it can be aware that like, oh, the auto updates just ran or things like that. So one of the things here, let me share my screen. I really like is Jetpack Backup um, because of a feature called the activity log, where one of the things that's really nice and only works because there is a plugin here is it's not just, hey, I'm just going to take a backup on a set schedule. Like it certainly can and does do that, but it also gives you this nice log of, hey, here's some things that changed on your site. An image was uploaded. These things were changed here. A backup ran. This is a new comment waiting for approval, things like that. It gives you this nice log of things that happened. And that requires a plugin because, well, it has to kind of be part of your site so that it can be aware of these things that are happening. So the same argument could be made for a security plugin that like, hey, maybe it's actually useful for your security solution to have some knowledge of what's going on specifically inside WordPress. Um, but most of the time, I would say that if you've got a good managed hosting provider, you shouldn't need a whole lot of extra security on top of that in the form of a plugin. That being said, it doesn't hurt. And WordFence is an excellent solution. Security is an excellent solution. There's a lot of really good security plugins out there, but that shouldn't be your only line of defense. Your host should be taking care of you there, making sure that you're on the latest version of PHP, making sure that it's brute force attacks on your login page don't work, that other types of attacks on your site don't work, things like that. So yeah, going back to here, security, speed, and backups. So yeah, these are all things it's good to talk to your host about. Make sure you've got a solution for. Maybe that solution involves a plugin, maybe it doesn't, but make sure you're covered in all of these categories. Let's continue. We talked a little bit about this already. WordFence is a great plugin. Security is a great plugin. It can give you some additional visibility into what's going on. I really like Jetpack Backup and because of the activity log. And there's also a lot of security features within Jetpack that I really like. Not everybody likes Jetpack, so it's really just a question of like personal preference. But yeah, WordFence has a free version that's pretty good. It's really worth trying out if you're concerned about it. But a good managed WordPress hosting provider is going to take care of a lot of the basics for you. or at least should be. Performance plugin. This is where it's really, really good to talk to your host, because they're going to have an opinion on what plugin you use. Most managed WordPress hosting providers publish a performance plugin. At Bluehost, the Bluehost plugin actually is made specifically for the hardware caching layer that we have. So you don't need another caching plugin in addition to that. But there are performance plugins that can still be useful. If you really want to be in control of every little aspect of the performance of your site, Perf Matters is a really interesting plugin that can help do that, where it gives you a ton of control. And it's if you're the sort of person that really likes to look under the hood and tinker around with every little setting of what you can do to get more performance out of something, then you might like Perf Matters. It is a paid plugin, but it's something that I've used before that works really well. It's not a caching plugin, so I should talk about a little bit what caching is. So what caching is when you visit a website, there's computation in order to produce the end result of the markup that your browser uses. So like when I go to this page, a server has to do some computational work to create this page and to send it to me, right? And this is true as I'm navigating around. Now, what a caching plugin can do is, after that computational work is done, it can sort of just save the answer in a way that's really easy to retrieve. So rather than doing all of the work to figure out how this page looks and all of these things, it can just sort of save the answer so that it can load really quickly. And so rather than programmatically putting it together every time, you can just, oh, well, we've already done the work. We know what this page is. We're just gonna pass it to the users. So it can really speed things up by just saving an already kind of rendered copy of an individual page. So that's in a nutshell what caching is. And there's different strategies for caching where you can cache different things. We're not going to get into the technical details of how it works beyond that, but because of that, a lot of times your hosting provider, if it's a managed WordPress hosting provider, will have a solution for you there. So just talk to them and make sure you have what you need. Talk to your host about caching solutions and object caching. Object caching is just another type of caching that helps things come from the database faster by saving results. Backup plugin. We talked a little bit about this already, but the idea that it is nice if your backup solution has a little bit of knowledge of what's going on inside WordPress. You can also manage it yourself. Every decent managed WordPress hosting provider is going to have something available to you where sometimes it costs extra, sometimes it's built into the price, sometimes it's not, so it'll depend on the plan and what you have and things like that. But they'll all have some solution available where they'll recommend that you do it a certain way. That being said, you don't have to do it however they recommend. And sometimes people like maintaining their own copies of backups as kind of a last resort thing, that even if something were to happen to, like, say, that company or something, that they'd have their own copy. And so for things like that, there are plugins for that. Let's do a little demo of that. So if I just search for backups, here's a lot of different ones. We'll recommend Jetpack Backup, but Updraft Plus is great. there's a lot of different solutions to this. A lot of them will cost money. Um, but yeah, there's you can do some with like off if you want to manage it yourself and like save it to Amazon S3 or save something to Google Drive or Dropbox or just your own computer or something. Um, you can use a plugin like Updraft Plus to do that. Um, the only thing to keep in mind with something like this is when you use something like this, it is using resources that are normally allocated towards serving your website for making a backup. So it's just something to keep in mind that that you are using some resources for that, and you have to be careful that if you're storing if you're storing backups on the web server where your website is, it can use up a lot of space. So you want to be careful about that if you're doing it yourself. Um, Whereas like using something sort of managed like Jetpack backups, you don't have to worry about it as much because it's stored separately. That being said, um, Updraft Plus lets you push it wherever you want. So if you don't necessarily, as long as you're careful, you shouldn't ever really have a problem with the storage and stuff. It's just how you want to do it. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of options there. I like the VaultPress one because of the cool activity log. But you also a lot of people really like to manage it themselves, and there's a lot to be said for that. One thing I will say is test a restore. So whatever you're using, the idea with a backup is that you can take a backup of a site. It saves basically like a copy of it, and then you can restore from that point. It's like going back in time, right? So test that out. Make sure that it works. The last thing you want to do is wait until you need to perform a restore to learn how it works. You want to know how that works ahead of time so that in the event of an emergency with your site or a problem with your site, you already know how it works. You know how to use it, you're familiar with it, and you can be confident that it really works. The last thing you would want is imagine you've got some backup solution that you think is working really well, and you're like, okay, I'm ready to do a restore, and it just sort of downloads like a zip file of your site, and it has a database export for you, and you're like, what do I do with this? I don't know what to do with this. Or maybe you do know what to do with it, but like make sure to test out your restore so that you're not surprised by how it works or it doesn't work in a way that you don't like or whatever. You want to figure that out while things are working and while things are calm and while nothing is wrong, rather than figuring it out during the stress of an outage or a problem So test restores, make sure they work, and make sure they work the way you want. Cool. Let's continue on. Chapter 3, plugins by use case, e-commerce, selling stuff. So the most common, almost default solution for selling things on a WordPress site is a plugin called WooCommerce. WooCommerce is great because it provides sort of this backbone foundation for all the functionality for a store that you could need. And there's a lot of extensions to it. It's almost like a plugin for a plugin where you can add additional functionality to WooCommerce that it might not have out of the box. But because WooCommerce is so popular and so much of a industry-leading standard for WordPress, it's kind of the standard that people will look for when they're making some kind of extension. So like there's a Stripe extension or things like that, or if you want to use PayPal on your site or something like that, they're going to assume most of the time that you're using WooCommerce. And so it kind of provides this structure that everyone else can build on top of when it comes to plugins. So it's pretty common if you've got a store to use both WooCommerce and a couple of extensions to WooCommerce to get what you need. So I'll go ahead and share my screen again. I think we already have WooCommerce over here. And that's why I have things like products, payments, things like that. One of the things that you can get through Bluehost, through one of our e-commerce packages, is sales and campaigns. What we did is we looked at what are some of the most common things people are getting WooCommerce extensions for, and we bundled them together in a plugin so that things like buy one, get one free, like if you want to run a campaign on your own site, that's how you can do it for like gift products, last minute deal. If you want a little thing that comes up and says, oh, here's a 10% discount on a thank you page or whatever, or a free shipping campaign, or anything like that. And there's even more here, like category discounts, or buy this, get that for free, frequently bought together. It's a lot of really cool functionality in here that can help you run really good campaigns if you've got a site. So that's something to look for, is Bluehost e-commerce solutions. Works really, really well. We're really pleased with that and being able to provide that for customers. That being said, you don't have to get all of this from us. There's a lot of different ways to get different plugins. And so if you've got something that you want, like, if I just search for WooCommerce, there's the WooCommerce plugin, and then there's a whole bunch of extensions that you can also get. Here's, payment gateways, things like that. Bluehost actually comes with free payment gateways. So if you want, like if I go in here to payments, we give you the ability to do things like PayPal and things like that for free as part of all of our e-commerce packages, which is pretty cool. But yeah, there's, if there's some specific payment gateway that you want to use, or maybe you want to use like Bitcoin or something weird, like there's really no limit to all the different ways you can do things. Cool. Let's go back to our slides. So that's enough about WooCommerce for now, but that is one of the most popular plugins out there because a lot of people want stores with their websites. We talked about this already, so I'm just going to skip over it. WonderBlocks. This is a fun one. Okay, so another thing we have available at Bluehost here is a really cool library of patterns available. So I'm just going to go up here, and when I add a new page or I add a new post, at Bluehost, there's this green button up here called WonderBlocks. And when I come here, there's all kinds of really nice patterns that you can use for different things. And here's forms. This one requires Jetpack. So I'll go ahead and install Jetpack, and there we go. I can use any of these for like a nice form. I've got all kinds of different cool patterns in here. And if I go over here to templates, it's like whole pages that you can use. So if I want to do, like, here's a nice whole page I can use. I'm just going to add this, and then here it is. It's an entire page, and I can go in here and edit it to say whatever I want. And there's all of this is just using core blocks. We just put together the patterns for it. And so it works really fast. It's automatically compatible with anything compatible with WordPress. It's great. And this is just available with the Bluehost plugin for every site. So that's really fun. If you're not a Bluehost customer, there's also other pattern libraries you can do by just searching for patterns in the plugins repo. Another thing you can do is you can go to wordpress.org and find patterns there. And Bluehost customers can do it too. But if I just go over to wordpress.org/patterns, there's a lot of different ones here. These are a little bit more kind of basic, but a lot of them look really nice. And depending on what you want, it's something. So, anyways, that's just another place to find patterns. But yeah, as a Bluehost person, I just feel like I have to at least shout out WonderBlocks because it's so cool. Like what you can build with it so quickly. You can put together a website with it. So, cool. Moving on, plugins by use case, blogging and content. Okay, let's keep going. SEO plugin. This is one of those where it really does make sense for your SEO solution, particularly on-page SEO, to be a plugin. Basically, every time you're going to want it to be a plugin because it's going to need to know what's in your posts, which all of your different pages. It's going to want to help you link things together. Now, this is if you're using Yoast or some other plugin, but this is one where pretty much every time you're going to need for it to be a plugin for this to work. And so what SEO is, if you're not already familiar, is just search engine optimization. So it's just making sure that your site is set up in a way that things like Google and things like Anthropic and AI systems can understand your website and can crawl your website. And that helps if you want your site to be found on Google search or some other search engine. It's got to be formatted in a way that it understands. And so an SEO plugin will help you do that. And it'll help you pick keywords that make sense. It'll help you optimize your post for certain keywords. It'll look through your post and, help you improve it. It'll find problems with it and things like that. So that it really needs to know what's in your posts and pages. It can put together a sitemap. So it really needs to be a plugin. Yoast is, of course, what we recommend at Bluehost. Yoast and Bluehost are the same company. But there's also other SEO plugins out there. Only pick one. There's Yoast SEO. There's also a paid version that has additional like content analysis stuff, one-click LLM, like large language model, AI preparation, things like that. It's really cool. Continuing on. Okay, so non-SEO stuff, more blogging tools. Remember how we talked about image sourcing, where you don't want to just go on Google Images to find pictures because those belong to somebody. You might not have the rights to those. But finding images that are licensed in such a way that anybody can use them. There's a really cool thing called Openverse where you can find a lot of different media. I can just go to openverse.org. I spelled it wrong, but Google helped me find it. And all kinds of different content in here. Audio, images, I think there's video too. But yeah, free stock photos or whatever. So if I want, an Arizona landscape, there we go. These are all available and you can filter by different things like, oh, I want to be able to use this commercially. I want to be able to modify it, that sort of thing. I'm like, oh, okay, here's ones where you can do that. Another great place to look is on wordpress.org/images. Is it not called that? What is it called now? Blocks, patterns, plugins, themes, open verse, WordPress images, photo direct. Oh, it's called photos. Excuse me, not images. It's called photos. Sorry about that. So, anyways, you get the idea. You search for photos, and these are all user submitted, freely available. You can use them for any reason, for any purpose, without attribution. I actually submitted one in here. I only submitted one, but I got one in here. These are some Christmas cookies made with the family. But yeah, there's a ton of really high quality photos in here that you can use. And so let's do this landscape. Let's search for that. And here we go. A lot of beautiful photos of different places, all taken by volunteers. So yeah, a lot of cool stuff in here. So going back to our slides, image sourcing, there are plugins that do that. You don't necessarily need a plugin for that, though. You can just sort of search and add the images yourself. Editorial calendar is another really common thing that sometimes people will use. WordPress does have built into it the ability to schedule posts ahead of time, but sometimes it is nice to put together like a calendar where you plan out well in advance what you're going to do. Analytics is another good one. So that's a thing that can help you see like traffic to your website, what pages people are going to, how people are finding your website, things like that. So there's Google Analytics plugins that can help with that. There's Jetpack Analytics, which is a little bit simpler to use, but not as feature robust. So Google Analytics is great if you really want to, like if this is a website where the traffic is making money. So you really want to optimize individual pages and create like a click funnel or something like that for like a store. Google Analytics is going to be really good for that. But if you just want the basics of knowing like what pages people are going to, how popular your posts are, things like that, Jetpack Stats is more than enough, and that's free. Google Analytics is free too. It's just a little bit harder to use, some people say. But yeah, there's a ton of plugins that'll help you do that. Chapter 5, mistakes, best practices, toolkit. Installing too many plugins can be a problem. Sometimes it can be a problem. There can be plugins that are only meant to be turned on while you're troubleshooting or while you're using them, and they're meant to be turned off when you're done. Using duplicates, more than one caching plugin when you don't really need more than one caching plugin. All kinds of stuff like that. Skipping updates. So if you have auto updates turned on, you should be great. But if you get really behind on updates, if you're doing them manually, that can be a problem. It can, if a vulnerability is discovered in a plugin, then that can leave your site kind of vulnerable to attacks. A good managed WordPress hosting provider should be taking care of that for you to a large extent, though. Forgetting to delete or deactivate unused plugins. That's another one. Which I should just show that off really quick. So in here, if I want to turn off a plugin, like here's actually a really fun one that I like, just as a quick tangent. It's called WP Dashboard Notes. And you can put little notes in your dashboard. So if I want to add a note, I can just put a little note in here. It's like having a little sticky note, and I can make it like a to-do list. I can make it like a free-form thing. I can share it with everybody else that's logged into WP Admin, or make it just me. I can change the color. It's really cool. So it's just a little plugin called WP Dashboard Notes. But let's say I'm not using that anymore. Well, then I would deactivate it and delete it because I'm not using it anymore. The less that's here, less complexity, less things that can go wrong. So just something to keep in mind. Let's continue on. 4 golden rules. Keep it lean. Only what you need. You get the idea. Think through whether or not something should be a plugin or not. Update regularly to stay secure. I don't think I showed you this yet, but one of the things you can do is just make sure that auto updates are turned on right here in the plugins section. If for Bluehost customers, we just made a setting where you can just turn them all on together, and that's on by default. But yeah, just make sure that that's turned on. You're going to want that to be the case. Or, some people do it manually, but just make sure you don't get behind if you're doing it manually. Delete unused or inactive plugins, as we said. Yeah, and that's basically it. All right, I think that takes us all the way to our Q&A. Devin, do we have any questions that you've picked from the chat?
Awesome. Yes, Chris, thank you so much. That was super helpful. I see a lot of people in the comments say that was very helpful. I appreciate you walking us all through that. A couple questions that I want to run through. We have a few minutes, so I want to get through some of these. I'm just going to start at the top. You recommended a couple different plugins today. Are there free versions for the plugins that you spoke about today?
Okay, so any plugin that you find on WordPress.org is going to be free. Some of the ones we talked about are paid plugins. Like there's a free version of Yoast SEO, and then there's the paid version with some extra features. The free version has quite a bit. It's very good. I would highly recommend it. When we talked about some of the features that are specific to Bluehost, those require a Bluehost hosting account. And I think Perf Matters is one that we talked about for performance. That one's paid, but every other plugin, I think, if memory serves, every other plugin we talked about is free. So it should be pretty straightforward. And I really only get plugins from WordPress.org normally, anyways, and so anything you get from there is going to be free. So that kind of makes it easy.
Cool. Yeah, and Chris, you already showed us how to install the plugin through the WordPress dashboard. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the WordPress.org plugins that you already spoke about that a little bit.
Right, exactly.
Okay, perfect. Next question we have, should I enable automatic updates for plugins, or should I update my plugins manually?
Yeah, we did cover this a little bit. So generally speaking, automatic updates are the way to go. The latest and greatest is going to be often the most secure. It's going to be have the most features. It's going to be it's just the latest. But you're for the security of your site, to make sure that you're compatible with the latest version of WordPress and things like that. It's always a good idea to be on the latest version of everything. That being said, if it is something really high risk, some people do like to manually update. So things like maybe a payment processor on WooCommerce or something like that. Maybe they like to update that manually where they get a chance to test it before and after. Or it's also really common practice for people to take a backup before running an update. But that being said, most of the time, we at Bluehost very much do encourage turning on automatic updates. just because it's what's going to keep your site safe and on the latest version of everything, which is just going to keep things running as smoothly and safely as possible.
Completely agree. The next question we have is, how many plugins is too many before performance becomes a problem?
Yeah, and we did talk about this a little bit. It's there is a sense of, is there too many of something? But what really matters is the quality of the plugin, because um, you can have a lot of plugins on your site and still have a very fast site if they are high quality plugins. So really, it depends on what the plugin is doing. Some plugins, like performance plugins, will actually make your site faster. But generally speaking, the traditional wisdom is that adding more plugins to your site is, if imagine you're going on a backpacking trip, it's adding more things to your backpack. So, do you need your water bottle? Probably. Do you need, a flashlight? Maybe. Do you need your PS5? Probably not. Right? It's the question of what is it really worth it lugging this around in your backpack? Some stuff is going to make it easier for you, so it's definitely worth it. Some stuff, it's a trade-off. So really, it's just a question of like quality more than it is quantity. Um, if it only takes one or two bad plugins to really slow down a website. So yeah.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. And to kind of continue going off of that analogy, if you're going on a long backpacking journey and you're cooking any food, you're not going to pull your oven out of the wall and bring that with you, but you might bring like a camping stove that's much smaller. So it's clearly much more efficiently built for a small purpose like that, right? Obviously, your at-home oven has its purposes, but I guess the point I'm trying to drive home is different constructions can be suited for different things, and there's some that are built specifically for the situation of being lightweight, being adaptable, being used in a specific situation, so that you're not lugging your double oven on whatever backpacking trip you're going on. You're just bringing a small thing to heat something up.
Another reason I like that analogy you just gave, Devin, it reminds me of one of the things we talked about in the webinar, but I'll reiterate, is the best plugin when it comes to, making sure that it doesn't slow things down is the one you never have to install. Or in other words, maybe what you need isn't actually a WordPress plugin, but just a general solution to a problem. Like, for example, a lot of times people will use editorial calendar sort of plugins for their website. Now, that's a great solution. A lot of popular blogs do it. I have nothing bad to say against it. However, some people might not even really need a plugin for that. Well, maybe just share a Google Calendar. Does it really need to be in WordPress every time is the question.
Yeah.
So sometimes maybe you need a solution. Maybe that solution isn't a plugin. Maybe it's some other software. Does it have to be inside WP Admin is really the question. If it needs to be a plugin, does it need to be part of your website, or can it be something else?
Right. Is it like a project management tool, or is it part of your website? Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. The next question I have on the list, if my host has a firewall, do I still need to be concerned about security and add a security plugin?
You'll hear a lot of different opinions on this. I will say, I've been with Bluehost since for I think over 10 years now. If you've got a decent hosting provider, they should be taking care of an overwhelming majority of what you need to be worried about when it comes to security, right? There's still some burden of responsibility on a site owner to keep things up to date, to make sure that passwords are safe and things like that. But ideally, a host is making it really, really easy to stay secure and really, really hard to get hacked. So is it a good idea to get a security plugin? Sure. But you shouldn't need one if you're on a decent host, if that sort of answers your question. Now, a lot of people really like Security. A lot of people really, really like WordFence. And those are great plugins. I've used them before. Um, but that is no substitute for going with a hosting provider that is being very careful about limiting login attempts, is looking at mitigating attacks, that is making sure that as vulnerabilities are disclosed, that auto updates for vulnerable plugins are automatically patched, that you're on secure versions of PHP, secure versions of WordPress core, things like that, that your host should really be making sure that you're on. So do you need it? Well, you shouldn't need it, but if you're on a decent host, it shouldn't really be mandatory, but it's not a bad idea, and a lot of people really do like them. If that sort of answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does, but I do want to call attention to one part. I don't want us to conflate not needing a security plugin with not needing security,
Sure.
because going back to one of the previous questions where someone asked about an auto update, one of the reasons why Bluehost offers automatic updates is because that's where a lot of vulnerabilities and hacks come through, is just an outdated theme, an outdated file, an outdated plugin. So by turning on the automatic updates, that's a security measure. So you're not necessarily using a specific security plugin, but you are still taking actions to making sure that your site is secure.
Right.
So
Yeah, and I would 100% agree with that. Um, yeah. Well, what other questions do we have?
yeah, next question is it's a caching question. They said you mentioned you that I should talk to my host, but what should I ask my host about
Gosh,
caching?
good question. Um, yeah, so with that, the reason I always say talk to your host is a lot of really good hosting providers, basically all of the decent hosting providers for WordPress, have a specific solution for caching in mind, right? And so one of the things we talked about is like try not to have too many plugins that overlap, too many plugins that do the same thing, duplicate sort of functionality. Um, you if you're hosting something yourself and you're managing everything down to the hardware, then yeah, you're really going to have to pick out your own caching solution, and that would include a plugin probably. But any decent managed hosting company is going to have, at minimum, a strong opinion about what caching plugin you should use. And in fact, most of them are actually going to have a caching plugin, right? So Bluehost has its own caching plugin. We have our own custom caching hardware that we do, and it clears that. So you actually really don't need something like W3 Total Cache if you're on managed WordPress hosting with Bluehost. And the same is true with a lot of other managed hosting providers, where they'll provide you with a caching plugin that is tailored specifically to that hosting environment. And so, yeah, if you call them up, just hey, what should I do about caching? Am I already taken care of? What plugin should I use? That sort of thing. And if you're a Bluehost customer, it's really simple. Just look for the Bluehost plugin. And if you don't have that, then just ask support, hey, can you add the Bluehost plugin to my site? And they'll be happy to do it.
Awesome. We still have a few more questions. I'm going to advance to the next slide that just gives a few more resources in case someone has any questions that we don't answer today. And we're doing everything we can to get to all the questions that we have had come in. But a few other links here if you're looking for more resources. The next question I have is, do I need a separate image optimization plugin, or does the caching plugin handle that as well?
It depends. Some caching plugins will do that, some won't. At Bluehost, image optimization is actually part of the package that we offer. So we will automatically crunch your images for you. Go ahead and just in the Bluehost plugin here, if I can even just share my screen really fast and show off how that works. If I go in here in my demo site, let me make sure that, so this is a test website. I'm always testing different things. make sure the Bluehost plugin is on so I can show you how this works. So over here in performance, I went to Bluehost and then performance here. There's actually image optimization here. So I can, you can automatically have images optimized. You can automatically have them be transformed into WebP, which is kind of nice because that will you'll get a better score with like Lighthouse tests, things like that. It'll load faster. It's a more modern image format. You can turn on things like lazy loading, but yeah, by default this should already be good. But just make sure you've got image optimization turned on. If you're not a Bluehost customer and you're sort of doing this yourself, it depends on the plugin. It might have it, it might not. You'll have to just sort of look through the menu, see what they've got. You might have to find an image optimization plugin and set that up yourself. Or maybe your hosting provider has something for you. It really just depends.
Cool. Awesome. I think this is going to be the last question that we might end on.
Okay.
How often should I run backups, and how many backups should I keep?
Okay. Well, that it can vary based on your site. And some of that is just how often are you updating your site. But it's a good idea to, if you're doing manual updates of plugins or things like that, or if this is a site that is generating revenue for you, to take backups often, because if weekly at a minimum, but ideally to have something daily. And how many backups should I keep? Keep it going back a couple of weeks if you can, just so that if something goes wrong, you can always kind of step backward in time. And that's one of the most common troubleshooting methods that people have available to them, at least in a hurry, is if something goes wrong and they're confident that hey, this didn't seem to used to be a problem, and why don't I try restoring from backup? Maybe that would fix the issue. Like maybe if a plugin update caused a problem or something like that.
Perfect. Well, I think that brings us to the conclusion of today's webinar. So thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you for everyone that engaged with us and joined us today. We hope this was helpful and beneficial for you. And if there's any other webinar topics that you would like to see us cover in the future, don't hesitate to drop those in the chat as well. We want to make sure that you're getting value out of this, and we want to be there for you when you have questions. So Chris, thank you again for sharing your expertise and your knowledge. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you again to everyone that stopped by. Bye, everybody.